Trump made it crystal clear that no wall funding would be a non-starter in their effort to reopen the government.
The $5.6 billion approved by the House is such a small amount compared to the level of the problem.
But Democrats wouldn't budge. Congresswoman Pelosi, who's expected to become the Speaker of the House, said they're voting on the Democrats' plan, which contains zero funding for a border wall.
Fox's Kristen Fisher. Passage of that measure in the House is likely on Thursday, but Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says it will die there.
The Senate will not waste its time considering a Democratic bill which cannot pass this chamber and which the President will not sign.
It remains an impasse as the partial government shutdown reaches its 13th day, with some suggesting this could be a long one. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham tells Fox's Sean Hannity there is a compromise to be had.
Give President the $5 billion we need for wall/border security as a down payment to securing the border. The DACA population, about 700,000, give them work permits, 3-year work permits, so they don't have to worry about getting deported anytime soon.
Senator Graham says the president cannot back down on wall funding now. State media reports China's space agency has landed a spacecraft on the dark side of the moon. The Chang'e 4 craft deploying a rover to probe the structure and mineral composition of the moon. A Greyhound bus has flipped over and landed in the median of an Interstate 55 entrance ramp during a heavy rainstorm in Jackson, Mississippi. Police had to carry injured passengers up a rain-slickened slope. 22 people have been taken to the hospital, but there are no serious injuries reported. This is Fox News.
Introducing Exchanged, Guam's first online and mobile remittance to the Philippines. Exchanged is the easiest and fastest way to send money to your family and friends anywhere in the Philippines. Download the Exchanged app or visit their website, exchanged.me. Sign up, remit, and get a chance to win a trip for 2 to Manila. Deluxe accommodations at the Belmont Hotel at Resorts World Manila. So sign up and remit now at Exchanged. Promo ends March 2nd, 2019. Conditions apply. Also avail of Exchange dollar to remit promo. Visit exchange.me for details.
Are you not getting paid what you're worth? Or not reaching your full potential at your job? If you're pioneering, adventurous, competitive, love talking to people, and want to earn $100,000 per year, sell cars on U.S. military bases with Military Auto Source. Start on Guam, stay on Guam, or move to Japan or Korea. To see if you qualify, visit MASEastasiarecruiting.com. Military Auto Source, helping you reach your full potential.
Already in the new year, several deaths in the entertainment world. Comedy veteran Bob Einstein, known for his role on Curb Your Enthusiasm, and the spoof act Super Dave, has died.
I had a problem. This is not an excuse. I don't make, Super Dave doesn't make excuses.
Bob Einstein was 76. Details of his death not immediately available. And a famous pop musician has sailed away.
One half of the 70s pop duo, the Captain and Tennille, has died. Daryl Dragon was 76 years old. Tony Tennille putting out a statement saying he was a brilliant musician with many friends who loved him greatly, adding, "I was at my most creative in my life when I was with him." Dragon was a keyboardist, arranger, and record producer known to his fans as the Captain, as he wore a captain's hat at all his performances. Daryl passed due to kidney failure. Their first hit, Love Will Keep Us Together, hit #1 in July of 1975. The two were so popular, they even had a hit network TV show. The two were divorced in 2014, but remained friends. Michelle Polino, Fox News.
Guitarist and vocalist Ray Sawyer, who fronted the rock band Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show, has died at the age of 81. Sawyer toured until 2 years ago. In the Sunshine State, a not-so-happy meal.
A Florida man was arrested after police say he assaulted a McDonald's employee by grabbing her shirt and attempting to pull her over the counter. A witness says the melee began after Daniel Taylor asked for a straw.
The young lady behind the counter told him that it's the law now, we're not allowed to have straws in the lobby, but you can request one.
The employee pummeled the man before others broke them apart. Taylor is now charged with 2 counts of simple battery for grabbing the employee and kicking another worker as he was being removed from the building. Rich Dennison, Fox News.
Government shutdown and weak iPhone holiday sales have the markets jittery. Dow futures down more than 360 points. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
There's a reason every day a Guam homeowner is getting a solar system installed by Micronesia Renewable Energy. It's because MRE is the most trusted name in solar. With more solar energy solutions than any other solar company on island, homeowners have a choice to go solar for zero money down or take the path to ownership. Whichever way, it keeps our skies blue and your pockets green. And with the most experienced solar technicians and an energy production guarantee, there are no worries. Call 632-2613 for a free consultation. MRE, the smarter choice.
Docomo Pacific is making the Better Together bundle even better. 2 great services plus more. Get unlimited local calls, SMS, and 20 gigs of data, plus unlimited home internet for $109 a month. Sign up today and get free installation and choose between a free Galaxy S8, S8 Plus, or $100 off select devices. Mobile plus online from Docomo Pacific. Better together. Some conditions apply. See store for details.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Yeah. Should I repeat that?
I don't think you need to, sir.
Yeah. I think by now it's burned into the consciousness of every one of our international radio listeners.
I agree,
right?
sir.
Yeah, if we gave a test... If a test were given on the United States Constitution in any school out there in an international radio listening audience, and one of the questions happened to be, what does the Second Amendment of the Constitution say? You'd see nothing but aces out there, I think.
I
right?
believe so, sir.
Yeah. Well, it's important that we focus on the Constitution every day, because this great country of ours depends in so many ways on the foundation established by the founders back in 1787 when they put together this Constitution, which was something that the world had never seen before. The idea that people could govern themselves without the assistance of royalty or feudal lords or other types of supervision such as that. With a concentration on individual rights. And that idea was an idea whose time had come. And not only did that idea change the lives of about 4 million people living on the edge of a pretty wild continent that had only recently been discovered by Europeans, that Constitution, that piece of paper, the ideals contained therein changed the entire world and continue to change the entire world. However, we can't rest on we can't rest on its laurels here for too long. We can't sit around and gloat because our Constitution is under attack from the left. I just read another article today. I didn't bring it along. But a couple of days ago, I read a little squib from the person who had served in the United States Congress from Michigan for 39 years, saying what we ought to do is we ought to abolish the Senate. And nowadays, I see a lot of attacks on the Senate from the left. It's just not egalitarian. You know, why should Wyoming, with about 600,000 people, have the same number of people as California with about 50 million people? It just isn't fair. So today I was reading this article saying that what we ought to do is reapportion the Senate. So instead of having 100 senators, we'd have 110. And each state would get at least one senator. That's pretty charitable. And the rest of the Senate seats, the smallest states would get one senator, and the rest would be apportioned pro rata. so that California would have 12 senators. I can't imagine a greater horror than to break up the Senate so that we destroy this idea, the remnant of federalism that we still have left, that we have 50 subordinate sovereigns, each of which is entitled to equal representation at the national capital by 2 senators. You know, it was bad enough back in 1912 when we amended the Constitution. Before that, senators were chosen by state legislatures, which to me was the way it should have remained, so that each one of those subordinate sovereigns had a representation at the national capital. But, you know, at the beginning of the progressive era, we came along with these ideas like initiative, referendum, recall, primary elections, and direct election of senators. So that instead of senators representing a state, they represented the voters in a state. Now, that sounds pretty innocuous, sounds more democratic, but not a good idea if you believe in the concept of federalism and subsidiarity, that decisions should be made at the most local level possible if you respect the democratic principles that the country was founded upon, and if you also are looking for high-quality decisions. So that's one of the reasons that we always start out with the Second Amendment. It's really important to remember what it is, the governing document for our country, and why we like some of the things about our country that we do like. So much for the Second Amendment. A lot of times I'll have a little tidbit, some crazy thing that the left has done to try to blunt the thrust of the Second Amendment. And, of course, I never get tired of picking on Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia and his apparent need for a remedial reading course, because apparently when he read the Second Amendment, he couldn't read the word militia. So in his 2 decisions, he sort of read the word militia right out of them. That's McDonald versus Chicago and District of Columbia versus Heller. Well, that's just a prefatory clause, and it really has no bearing on the rest of the Second Amendment, which anybody who could read would instantly determine that what was intended there was to create an individual constitutional right to keep a firearm in your house. An idea that I like. I just think that, you know, I'm a rule of law type of person, and I think that reaching the right result for the wrong reason oftentimes leads to greater problems than not having that right result. But let's move on. What's the next? You know, Real Joe Cruz, I've been doing this program for so long now, but sometimes I kind of forget the order of things in which we attack the issue. So what's next on the agenda here?
Zemi Ikutni, sir.
Zemi Ikutni.
Yes, sir.
Can you hum a few bars? There you go. Zemi Ikutni, the bilingual play on words. Press the Meat, or in our case, Meet the Press, where we analyze the editorials of our 2 daily newspapers. We analyze them, we parse them, we autopsy them. I check their grammar and usage of the Ifino English. Sometimes I mark them up a little bit. And usually at the end of the analysis, one or the 2 will receive the coveted blue star, meaning that it is the better of the 2 editorials for this particular day. And when I do that, if you listen carefully, if you're in the downtown area, oftentimes you can hear the champagne corks popping in the editorial boardroom of the newspaper that got that blue star. So, and I mentioned, I didn't get to it yesterday. I mentioned yesterday that one of the items on the card that I may get to today. I've got a lot of analysis to do of the incoming officers in the new administration, but one of the items on the card is Zemi Ikotny versus the other Meet the Press. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Okay, let's start out with the Daily News editorial. Our view: Gita was following the law when it allocated money to itself. So is it perhaps an apocryphal headline when it is news, when a government agency follows the law? Is that newsworthy? Breaking news. The Department of Land Management followed the law yesterday. Oh, my goodness. Did we have several reporters cover it? Were photos taken? Is there a video somewhere? This doesn't happen very often. This is an historical event. A government agency followed the law? Well, not so, but sometimes one wonders. But here's a headline: Gita was following the law when it allocated money to itself. The recent performance audit conducted by the Office of Public Accountability, that's B.J. Cruz for the uninitiated, on the Guam Economic Development Authority qualifying certificate community cash contributions, there's quite a sentence, qualifying certificate community cash contributions confirmed what has been reported earlier by the Daily News. Gita allowed its administrator to have wide discretion in distributing money collected from community contributions, and as a result, most of the money was allocated to Gita itself for marketing and economic development operations. This was allowed under the law. To prevent this from happening, more scrutiny should have been exercised by the Gita board and by senators who have oversight over the agency. Auditor B.J. Cruz also noted that there was a lack of monitoring of certain cash contributions. In the response to the audit, Gita Administrator J. Rojas correctly pointed out that the agency has government-issued authority over the use of funds and has, quote, been mandated by law as the government agency tasked with managing the general economic development of Guam through the administration of its programs and activities. Any expenditures incurred by the agency in fulfilling its mission from whatever sources is considered a function of economic development, Rojas wrote in response to Cruz. In other words, Gita is using the money for if Gita is using the money for anything at all, it's using it for economic development. There's an argument you cannot lose. Mr. Rojas, I have a question for you. I understand that you spent $20,000 buying several thousand pieces of bubble gum. Is there any truth to that statement? Oh, yes, that's true, Bob. Yeah, we spent about $20,000 buying bubble gum. Why did you think you needed all that bubble gum, Mr. Rojas? Well, it was for economic development. Oh, okay, I got it. Yeah, so it doesn't matter what they spend it on. By definition, it's for economic development. According to the Daily News analysis, Cruz noted a perceived lack of transparency, but again, it is not the fault of the agency. Well, whose fault is it then? You know, we have this tendency of saying, we're looking for accountability. You know, accountability, we're looking for accountability in government. But then we turn around and say, but it's not the fault of the agency. It's not the fault of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, because they investigated themselves and they found no wrongdoing. So, you know, it's just very impolite to find fault with people who didn't find any fault with themselves. The administrator and the agency were following the rules that had been created. Since the issue was raised earlier in 2018, a number of changes have been made. In November, Gita approved new guidelines for the allocation of community contributions received from businesses with tax break certificates. Under the new policy, Gita's board no longer allows the agency's administrator to decide how to allocate the funding. Well, let me just stop here and put in my my 2 yen worth, okay? 2 cents, 2 yen, 2 pfennig, or something. The reason that we have boards or commissions, and by the way, if there is a commission, you don't call it a board. There's no board at the Civil Service Commission, although they don't understand that. They talk about, well, the Civil Service Commission board met last night. But the reason that we have boards and commissions is because we think that we get a higher quality, more ethical, more equitable decision from a group of people acting in concert than we do from a single person. But if all we want is arbitrary and capricious decisions, arbitrary and capricious, poorly thought out decisions, then we don't need to have 5 or 7 people sitting down at a conference table and going through all of the rigmarole that boards and commissions need to go through. You can probably find some guy out in the parking lot and pay him minimum wage, and he'd be glad to fulfill that function for you. And that's exactly what happened at Gita. You know, instead of the board of directors at Gita making these decisions, they just said, well, go ahead, Mr. Administrator, you do it the way you want to. Well, if that's the case, then we don't need a board at Gita. They should have sent a note to the legislature at the same time, 2 pieces of paper. One, Director, Mr. Rojas, you go ahead and do it. And second note to the legislature, please abolish this board because we're obviously superfluous. Under the new policy, Gita's board no longer allows the agency's administrator to decide how to allocate funding. The new guidelines also spell out the rules to apply for the funding, including publicly disclosing that the funding is available. So this is how it works. When a company applies for a qualifying certificate and is successful, it's given a very substantial tax break. Usually a tax break against gross receipts tax, real property tax, and even the territorial income tax. But in addition to that, because of that tax break, then they're also required to make a community contribution to Gita, which in one case is $1 million. So instead of paying taxes, they pay this community contribution to Gita. And then Gita is supposed to allocate that amongst worthy causes. But of course, the worthy causes don't know that Gita has that money. So now Gita has to advertise and say, well, we've got so much money for health care and so much for education, et cetera. And then government agencies can put in a chit asking for some of that money. Now, I would just comment on the whole system. It's a screwy system. Why give a company a tax break on the one hand and then on the other hand say, well, you don't have to pay taxes, but you got to pay this silly community contribution. And what the community contribution does up until now, and it will continue, it creates a slush fund under the control of people who weren't elected by anyone. And as we see from this editorial, the slush fund was under the control of one person. So why do we need a slush fund? If we're going to give a company a tax break, give them the tax break. Don't make them contribute to the slush fund, because what happens then, we have something that's like a tax that a business has to pay, but instead of paying it to the Department of Revenue and Taxation to be appropriated like all of the other funds that the government gets its hands on, instead of doing that, the money goes to a slush fund at Gita, and up until now it's spent the way Jay Rojas wanted to spend it. This is not good government. So this whole idea of community contributions, I suppose you could patch it up and take some of the kinks out of it, but it's not a good idea. It should be just junked. And if we're going to use tax incentives to lure businesses to our island, then let's just do that and forget about the slush fund. Going on with the editorial. Later, lawmakers decided to step in and remove Gita's discretion, allocating this year's money to public health. Well, that's my point. That's what the legislature is there for. The legislature's probably most important job is appropriating the money that the government raises through taxes. So why would they want competition from an unelected group of bureaucrats who collected this slush fund? And the punchline of the editorial: if these rules had been in place from the beginning, emphasizing a spirit of transparency, Gita would be more trustworthy in the eyes of the public. Well, I can't argue with that. That makes a lot of sense. You know, part of the problem with the trustworthiness of Gita was that, I don't remember how long ago it was, but last year for sure, Jay Rojas posted some items on his Facebook page showing that he had accumulated over 1.5 million airline miles traveling on behalf of Gita. This doesn't seem right either. I would expect that if you are the guy whose job is to do economic development, you got to do a lot of traveling. You perhaps are a traveling salesman on a gigantic scale, but the administrator of Gita is paid pretty well for that job. If he gets the airline miles as a perk, well, it happens. But it's not something to brag about. That just really rubs your average citizen the wrong way, and once you do something like that, you kissed a huge chunk of your credibility goodbye. So we've got an incoming administration. We have a designated new administrator of Gita, Melanie Mendiola, and let's hope that Melanie Mendiola is a citizen of Tall Tales Nation, so that she has been inculcated with all of the wisdom that flows out over the airways every day from 1600 till 1800, right here on 93.3 FM, The Point. And if you want to participate in this flow of information, it's pretty easy. We have a phone number. It's 888-TALK, 888-8255. So give us a buzz. And if you call that number, you will have the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to chat on the telephone with the real Joe Cruz. Yeah. Now talk about an incentive. There it is, right? Bob, anybody can talk to Bob, but the real Joe Cruz, that is really saying something. And then, of course, we're here on Facebook Live, and I do monitor our Facebook posts, and I thrive on them. Sometimes some really good stuff comes in on those Facebook posts that I plagiarize and use myself right here on the air. So I hear the real Joe playing one of my favorite songs, Dave Brubeck's Take 5. So I'll be back in a minute.
John Gibson, digging up history. The disastrous battle that somehow came to be regarded as noble and heroic and gave us a sweater. That story after this. Let's talk heirloom sheets and towels from Redland Cotton in Alabama. First, the family farm, growing the finest cotton in the world. The spinning, the looming, every step made in America, right down to the cutting and sewing. Sheets designed from a long-lost 1920s weave. The softest, most comfortable, longest-lasting sheets you've ever slept on. The Redland family, dedicated to America and linens you'll treasure. Check out redlandcotton.com for America's linen. redlandcotton.com. Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, was about a real disaster for the British in the Crimean War. You've heard the poem. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Theirs was not to reason why. Theirs was but to do and die. It was about botched, misunderstood orders and British soldiers riding into a massacre. But in the public imagination, the charge of the Light Brigade became noble and heroic, even though a disaster. And people adopted a sweater given to the doomed soldiers to keep warm by their commander, James Brundinel. You know that sweater even today. Brundonell was a minor royal and earl. He was the Earl of Cardigan. I'm John Gibson, digging up history.
It's important to have claims process that works for you. At Guahan Insurance Services, we make things simple and convenient. Same door you walk in to purchase your insurance is the same door you open to file your claim. We can't pretend that the car insurance claims process is fun, but we can promise a hassle-free and speedy recovery without any runarounds. For your home, auto, and business insurance, visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center on Marine Corps Drive in Tamuning. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or give us a call at 475-1162 or text 929-SAVE. That's 929-7283.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So much for the daily news. And Gita, moving right along here to the Post editorial, the title of which is Greater Parental Involvement Needed to Guide Island's Young People. Recent reports about troubled students send a message loud and clear that greater parental involvement is needed. Last week, educators met with law enforcement officials to discuss school safety. School administrators expressed concerns about combative and intoxicated students. Carla Mesnayan, the principal at Simon Sanchez, said her issue this year is student intoxication. Mesnayan discussed fines for parents of students who are repeat offenders. Somehow there has to be a way for parents to be a little bit more involved. Mesnayan said, somehow someone is giving students alcohol to bring to school. Robert Martinez, the principal at FB Leon Guerrero, asked what was being done to hold parents responsible. We need to send a strong message to parents derelict to their duty, he said. In another story, Department of Youth Affairs Director, he's actually the Director of Youth Affairs. He's not the Director of the Department. The Director of Youth Affairs, Peter Atta, said what is needed most in the future is parent involvement. Atta said oftentimes the children will go to court, but the parents will not show up. And DYA has no choice but to continue to hold them. Back to the editorial. Many children and teens are neglected or abused, are causing problems in schools and elsewhere in our community. So we all have a stake in getting to the root of the issue. Why aren't some parents more involved in their children's lives? What can be done to reverse the trend? The solution will have to be multifaceted because there is a range of contributing factors. Some parents are addicted to drugs. Others are working 2 jobs. Some parents just don't know how to parent. As we work toward getting more parents to be responsible, other family members can help children and teens. Grandparents, aunts, and uncles can serve as positive role models. But the onus lies on parents who play an irreplaceable role in their children's emotional, mental, and physical well-being. Parents must take a hard look at how they're raising their children and whether they are setting them up for success. It doesn't make sense for parents to expect their kids to succeed at school or in life if they fail them. Well, yeah, this is all right, all correct. Question. How many of these parents who neglect their children read the editorial in the Daily News every day? Anyone care to do a statistical breakdown here? If you were to divide, let's see, I think we got 160,000 people on the island. If you were to divide 0 by 160,000, what would the answer be? Because I have a feeling that all of the people that ought to be paying heed to this don't read the paper. It boggles the mind to think that there are people that don't read the paper. Even more mind-boggling is that there are people who have radios and computers that don't listen to Tall Tales every day. But it happens. So this whole exercise here talking about parents, we got to get the parents more involved. I don't know if I ever used this before, but this whole idea of putting a notice in the newspaper telling parents that they need to be more involved with their children kind of reminds me of the way my dad taught me how to catch a robin. Did I ever talk about that on the air before, Real Joe Cruz?
I'm not sure, sir.
It's one of the perils of old age. You know a lot of really interesting stories, but you can't remember which one you told before. So anyhow, back in the Middle West, you know it's spring because you see a robin. So when you see your first robin, you celebrate and you say, "Oh boy, it's spring again. The robin, there's my first robin." And the robins are ubiquitous, and they're very, very tame. And if you're just a little kid and you walk very carefully, you could probably get within 4 or 5 feet of a robin without even trying. But you get a little closer than that, the robin flies away. So one time I said to my dad, "I'd really like to catch a robin, Dad. How could I catch a robin?" And he said, "Well, it's really very easy, Bobby. Just get yourself a salt shaker and put salt on the robin's tail, and then he won't be able to fly." And here, that's what the Daily News is doing here. You know, the way you get parents more involved, you know, as you get them to read this this article in the Daily News, it's like putting salt on the robin's tail, right? So one other little Bobism here is that this article, I mean, this editorial and this approach kind of reminds me of the time that the University of Guam became, people at university became concerned about the lack of involvement of students and the population in general in the affairs of the island. So what they did was they created this, or they sponsored this seminar on apathy at the university. You know what happened, Real Joe Cruz, to this seminar on apathy? Nobody showed up. So, yeah, this is very platitudinous Daily News, but I wouldn't say it's a complete waste of paper, but pretty close to it. You got to try a little bit harder than this. If you wanted to do something like propose criminal sanctions for every kid that comes to school with alcohol or under the influence of alcohol, you go out and round up his parents and bring them before a magistrate. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but at least it's an idea. And it beats the heck out of saying, well, parents have to get more involved. Okay, so it's time for a ruling here. I guess it's probably not going to be too much of a surprise. So today, the coveted blue star goes to the Daily News for their very radical headline talking about Gita following the law. What a shocker that was. Okay, so so much for Zemi Ikotny for today. And now we go to the card. And let's see, I always start the card out here with the law lecture. I find my materials for the law lecture here. Okay, I found it. So we talk a lot about the laws of Guam, Northern Marianas, the United States, Supreme Court, etc. And as I say every day, I just think it would be really helpful if our Tall Tales International radio listening audience had some familiarity with some of the state laws. So yesterday we talked about Nebraska and Nevada. And that takes us now to the news. Yeah, we just finished the news, right? The editorials. Well, this is a different kind of news. This is New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, New California, no. New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, etc. So let's start out in New Hampshire. That's a pretty interesting state. That's where you could. That's the other place where you can get the burn. One place is at the Department of Administration. You can get the burn, and if you are in New Hampshire, you find your. No, I guess Bernie's from Vermont, right? Vermont, New Hampshire, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Anyhow, in New Hampshire, it's illegal to sell the clothes one is wearing to pay off a gambling debt. Okay, in New Hampshire, it is illegal to sell the clothes one is wearing to pay off a gambling debt. So I guess you would never be able to use this phrase. Yeah, I went down to the casino last night. I wasn't lucky at all. I lost my shirt. If you said that in New Hampshire, you're kind of confessing to a crime. In New Hampshire, it's illegal to check into a hotel under an assumed name. I wonder where that kind of a law came from, huh? And New Jersey, in New Jersey, it's against the law to frown at a police officer. Yeah, I think there's a term for that, frowning at a police officer. If you frown at a police officer, you may be found guilty of contempt of cop, a serious violation. And in Newark, New Jersey, it's illegal to sell ice cream after 6 p.m. unless the customer has a note from his doctor. Now, this is ice cream. This is not cannabis. Okay. Also in New Jersey, it is illegal to slurp soup. Well, that sounds like a good law to me. You cannot slurp soup in New Jersey. And in Trenton, New Jersey, it's illegal to throw a bad pickle in the street. So if you're eating pickles and you come across a bad pickle and you throw the pickle in the street and you frown at a cop when you're doing it, you may be in a pickle yourself. Okay, so that's New Hampshire and New Jersey. We're going to go to New Mexico and New York tomorrow for our law lecture. And now I go to the card, and I'm going to pick up where I left off yesterday, which was titled on the card is Lou Leon Guerrero versus the Tall Tales Political Intel Line. And what I was doing yesterday was commenting on Lou's ability to follow the suggestions, actually the diktats, of the Tall Tales Political Intel Line. But I also use that as a vehicle to make some pithy comments. Don't get too close to your the speaker on your phone there when I cough that close to the microphone. Make some pithy comments about some of the appointments, and I'm going to continue that. I did mention Rory yesterday. Rory is the new director of Commercial Port. And I heard Rory and Ray talking on Ray's show this morning, and it reminded me of a gaze that I took into the crystal ball a couple of weeks ago after Rory's name had surfaced in the Tall Tales Political Intel Line as the probable choice to run the port. I looked into my crystal ball and I said, this may be good news for the Commercial Port 7. You remember that, real Joe Cruz? By way of explanation, the Commercial Port 7 are 7 people that then director of the Commercial Port fired. It was Mary Camacho who fired 7 people at the port for what was reported as an alleged violation of port rules concerning off-island travel of one of the port employees who had suffered a workplace injury. 7 of them were fired. The cases bounced around in and out of the court, the Supreme Court, the Civil Service Commission. I don't have a box score as to how many of them have not been resolved, but I know they have not all been resolved. And this morning, Rory said, we're going to take a look at those cases and decide what the best disposition we can make of them is. Well, if you're going to make a disposition of pending cases, to me, that can mean only one thing. You're going to flange them up. You're going to settle them. You're going to give the employees their jobs back. That's what it would mean to me. Now, maybe I'm just reading something into what Rory said that isn't there. But I will say this, that after all this time, if those people are returned to their duties and given huge chunks of back pay, I don't think I'm going to be real happy about it. I don't think a lot of other people are going to be real happy about it either. But that was something that I did detect in the inner reaches of my crystal ball after I found it way back on the floor of my closet at home and gazed in it to see about that particular matter. So Rory didn't say anything about the YTK potential $15 million drain on port revenue. We know that case currently pens before the Supreme Court. And depending on what the Supreme Court does with that case, that may be a real challenge for Rory as the new director of Commercial Port. I also mentioned that Tom Atta will be the new executive manager of the airport. And there's some really hot issues going on there, too. There is all of the litigation involving Lotte Duty Free, DFS, and the airport itself. Some serious allegations, some grand jury summonses, the allegation that one of Lotte's employees in Korea collaborated with DFS officers to give the DFS folks insight into Lotte's negotiation position concerning the airport. Going to be some real tough issues there, and I wish Tom the best of luck, and I hope that he's more deft at handling those legal issues than he was with the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, which he either ignored or aided and abetted the entire scandal during the time, from the time it arose until he attempted to influence what's going to happen in the next legislature by coming up with this report for the record and his recommendations to the new legislature. So need to take a short break here. We'll come back to this analysis and then we'll get on with the card.
Cheers to 80 years. It's our 80th anniversary and the gifts are on us. 80 gift certificates, 8 shopping sprees, 8 staycations, and 1 round trip flyaway for 2 to Manila. So how do you enter? Calvo's Insurance personal home and auto customers are automatically entered. Non-Calvo's customers may enter by receiving a qualified quote. It's our way of saying thank you for trusting us for the past 80 years. For more details, visit calvos.com/giveaway or call 472-6816. Calvo's Insurance, serving Guam for 80 years.
Chili's 3 for Me menu just got bigger. We're giving you more choices for the same great price. For just $15, you can get a beverage, salad, and an entree. First, choose from a refreshing Coca-Cola, iced tea, or Heineken on draft. Then enjoy a house salad and select your choice of a mouth-watering entree, like our half-rack ribs, Cajun chicken pasta, old-timer burger, personal chicken fajitas, or the flavorful margarita flatbread. So hurry in today and enjoy our Chili's 3 for Me menu for just $15. Available for a limited time. Chili's, more life happens here.
So here we are back again. Here's another name on the list that I think bears a little bit of attention. Ray Topaznia is the designated executive director for the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority. Now, you may remember Ray Topaznia as the whistleblower who blew some whistles on Gura and also blew some whistles on I believe it was Gita. He was also at Gita at one time, and he had some very uncomplimentary things to say about those agencies under the Calvo administration. So one wonders if you have a whistleblower who, for some people, means a troublemaker, and you bring him into your administration, what analysis do you bring to that? Well, easy analysis was, well, this guy knows what happened, what went wrong, how to fix it, who the wrongdoers are, so we need to bring him in and clean up this mess. That's one analysis. The second analysis is Sun Tzu, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer still, as expressed by LBJ when someone mentioned someone who was opposed to LBJ's policies. LBJ said, yeah, well, I know what you're saying, but I'd rather have him on the inside of the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. So maybe the second analysis is that perhaps the Leon Guerrero administration would rather have Ray Topaznia on the inside of the tent rather than on the outside of the tent. Third analysis is maybe he's just a really capable administrator, and the Leon Guerrero administrator is going to say is only saying, we don't care about that stuff. We think he can do the job. We're looking for good people. We're going to bring him on board. But the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority is not without its problems. So this is going to be a real hot spot to watch to see how Ray Topaznia handles that. And, of course, in order for Ray Topaznia to be the executive director, he has to be chosen by the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority Board of Directors, all of whom are appointed by the governor. And as a practical matter, board members appointed by the governor usually carry out the governor's wishes when it comes to appointing directors, etc. And there's, of course, a political power dimension to this also, and that is, with only one exception, the governor can fire every board member on the island and replace them with people who would be more in accord with his own philosophy. The only exception is the Civil Service Commission, because the Organic Act was amended to say that Civil Service Commission members can only be removed in accordance with the laws of Guam. And the current statute on the book says only removed for cause, not for making dumb decisions. So with respect to Ray Topaznia, my sense is that he will be chosen by the commissioners, et cetera. But while we're talking about boards and commissions, I added to Ray's list here, I think the first time he announced it, he said a couple of things he really wanted to see done in the new administration. He wants that ugly cyclone fence on the median on Marine Corps Drive adjacent to John F. Kennedy High School. He wants something done with that. And then he also wanted the garbage trucks repaired so that they wouldn't be squirting Hadum Basula on the highways of Guam. And we reported here that that problem was solved by none other than your favorite caller, Real Joe Cruz.
Jimmy.
Your second.
Tom Poole.
Yeah, Tom Poole. Yeah, my bad. Of course, Jimmy's your favorite caller. Right, Tom Poole solved that. And I added to that list, still want to see the governor, the new governor, come in and fire that whole Chamorro Land Trust Commission and replace that commission with 7 people who might have some interest in actually doing the job. Because I haven't seen that from this current commission. When they came out and said, oh, yeah, we we did an investigation here and nobody did anything wrong. Whatever faith I had in them was very quickly dispelled at that particular point. Another name on the list here, Elizabeth F. Napoli, Deputy Executive Director for GURA. I have to say that I don't know anything at all about Elizabeth Napoli, but I guess the real Joe Cruz would confer with me that anyone who has an Italian name can't be all bad, right, real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of my analysis. Now, I know that a raft of new appointments was announced this afternoon, and I could chirp about them a little bit, but I know that's not what our international radio listening audience expects when they tune in to Tall Tales. They want to know not only what, but they want to know why. And it's the purpose of Tall Tales to come along here and explain at least some of the whys things happened, at least to the best of my ability, to bring such insight and inferences to the events, especially the political and social events that occur on our island, and they have some sort of a colorable explanation as to why these things happen or why they don't happen. So even if I had that list in front of me right now, I would hang on to it until tomorrow so that I would be able to provide the kind of analysis that I know our international radio listening audience is really looking forward to. So that's that part of the card. The next item on the card is the Leon Guerrero administration versus the legislature. And there are two bones of contention here. First is deputy directors. Now, I've mentioned who the deputy director designees are in the Lou Leon Guerrero administration. Elizabeth Napoli was the last one I mentioned. So Lou has gone about very quickly designating deputy directors for her new administration, even before the Attorney General had opined that the statute restricting the governor's ability to appoint deputy directors was inorganic. She named them anyhow. Perhaps she was peeking into my crystal ball and was saying, yeah, you know, I think the Attorney General is going to say that that's inorganic, so I'll just go ahead and do it. And parenthetically, maybe just as a footnote, I would add, it would be possible to draft a statute that said no deputy directors, but it has to be very carefully done, just like the one about the salary freeze. They actually use the word freeze in that statute. salary increments, we're going to freeze salary increments. Well, freeze is something you do with water or popsicles or something like that. You know, everybody knows what you mean when you say that, but it's not very scholarly language. And if someone is going to draft language that will pass through the Organic Act eye of the needle, it has to be very carefully done, and just common coffee shop language might not do it. But in any case, Lou came right out and we're going to have deputy directors here. Now, I can understand that, and for some agencies I could defend it. I talked about that a little bit yesterday about how a deputy director, depending on the personalities and the agency involved, can be very beneficial. I also know from my own experience that it's just a place to park people and to engage in a little bit of political patronage. But I'm going to come back to this. I know you've all been waiting eagerly for that big halftime show we have at 5 every afternoon. So here it is. I'll be back right after the show.
point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Still shut down. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. A large part of the federal government unfunded and still closed in a showdown over funding for a border wall. President Trump says he has to have it. Congressional Democrats say they won't give it. No progress at a Wednesday White House meeting. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise says Democrat leaders were unreceptive.
Our Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was getting ready to give a briefing on all of the problems, the crisis at the border, at the beginning of this White House briefing, and Pelosi, Schumer kept interrupting her because they didn't want to hear the numbers. Representative Scalise tells Fox's Sean Hannity the Democrats can't say they're for border security and, at the same time, oppose the wall. Thursday, Democrats will assume the majority in the House of Representatives, and they'll likely pass bills to reauthorize spending for those closed federal government agencies, but the Senate will then refuse to consider those bills. All of this after Thursday's changing of the gavel.
The first vote in the House is for Speaker. Both parties will formally nominate their choices, Nancy Pelosi for the Democrats, Kevin McCarthy for the Republicans. That vote is done by roll call. Each member's name is read. They vote out loud, usually for the preference of their party, but not always. In fact, the Constitution does not specify the Speaker has to be a member of the House. To be elected, a Speaker must have an absolute majority of votes cast. If no candidate receives a majority, the roll call is repeated until a Speaker is elected.
Fox's Jared Halpern. China has landed a spacecraft on the moon for the first time ever, landing on the dark side of the moon, not visible from Earth. Chinese state media says the probe will study the moon's mineral composition. 22 people have been taken to the hospital following a bus crash in Mississippi. A Greyhound bus slid off an interstate entrance ramp in Jackson during a heavy rainstorm. None of those injuries is believed to be serious. This is Fox News.
There's a reason every day a Guam homeowner is getting a solar system installed by Micronesia Renewable Energy. It's because MRE is the most trusted name in solar. With more solar energy solutions than any other solar company on island, homeowners have a choice to go solar for zero money down or take the path to ownership. Whichever way, it keeps our skies blue and your pockets green. And with the most experienced solar technicians and an energy production guarantee, there are no worries. Call 632-2613 for a free consultation. MRE, the smarter choice.
Ang inyong bangko na tapat sa serbisyo, tunay na kaibigan at handa para sa inyo. Ang bangko ng kinabukasan, laging maaasahan. And Pacific, where others dug branches, we place through.
The New York Times coverage of President Trump is biased, according to the paper's former editor.
Former New York Times executive editor Jill Abramson calling the publication's coverage of the president unmistakably anti-Trump. In her upcoming book, Merchants of Truth, Abramson criticized her successor, Dean Baquet, saying given its mostly liberal audience, there was an implicit financial reward for the Times in running lots of Trump stories, almost all of them negative. They drove big traffic numbers. While Abramson disapproves of the president's attacks on the press, she suggests the Times and Washington Post fuel mistrust of the media, explaining some headlines contained raw opinion. Kristen Goodwin, Fox News.
Jury selection begins in the morning for Jason Dalton in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He was an Uber driver who police say shot and killed 6 people at random in February of 2016 while making Uber pickups. A Mexican national accused of living in the U.S. illegally was charged Wednesday with murder in the shooting death of a California police officer who'd pulled him over to check to see if he was driving drunk. Gustavo Perez Arriaga making his first court appearance in Modesto. He did not enter a plea, though, in last week's killing of Captain Ronil Singh of the tiny Newman, California Police Department. The court has ordered he be given a mental competency evaluation. Police in Los Angeles announcing they've arrested a suspect in a string of high-end celebrity burglaries.
Over 2,000 high-end items, which included stolen art, clothing, purses, jewelry, fine wine, and other very expensive items.
Philly Police Captain Corey Palka, who says the suspect, Benjamin Ackerman, cased celebrity homes by posing as a high-end real estate broker. Many of the stolen items were found after police executed a search warrant on a storage unit. In New York, I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Docomo Pacific is making the Better Together bundle even better. 2 great services plus more. Get unlimited local calls, SMS, and 20 gigs of data, plus unlimited home internet for $109 a month. Sign up today and get free installation and choose between a free Galaxy S8, S8 Plus, or $100 off select devices. Mobile plus online from Docomo Pacific. Better together. Some conditions apply. See store for details.
Security Title is honored to sponsor Ray Gibson on The Point. In 2019, we resolved to continue our mission of protecting and ensuring the land and homes of our beautiful island. Additionally, we resolved to maintain our vital connection to our families and our community. Protehi Itanomo, protect your land. When it comes to your family land, remember to call the professionals at Security Title, just like you call Ray Gibson in the morning.
One of the greatest halftime shows of all time, right here on Tall Tales every afternoon at 5. So, Real Joe Cruz, I think maybe I'll welcome back some of our Tall Tales Nation citizens here.
Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back, Juanita Machi. And Tom Van Engen, Brad Hewitt, who is locked and loaded. And we've got Nye San Nicolas. When does school start? And the answer, Nye San Nicolas, when does school start? 4 o'clock every afternoon, Monday through Friday, right here at 93.3. And then we've got Lynn and Vince Bora Polino. And Tom Van Engen has a question. How did Guam come up with the idea we have to pay them to have a firearms ID in order to exercise the Second Amendment right? And I'll give you the best answer I can. I think Brad comments on it a little later on, and I'll handle both of them at the same time. Brad comments on the GITA payoff. And I want to welcome back former Governor Carl Gutierrez. Always glad to see you on board, Governor. Ismo Les is here. And then Brad says, the powers that be have come a long way to get to this point. Used to be arbitrary who was allowed to have a firearms ID, usually based on political or family affiliation. That law was changed. Thank goodness. Now we have to pay for the ID. Hope we can overcome that soon. Well, let's just talk about the mechanics of firearms IDs. As far as I know, we've always had the requirement of an ID, firearms ID. I suspect it goes back to the Naval Administration. It's been in place ever since I can remember, but a firearms ID was issued on demand to anyone who could pony up the filing fee, and you had to also be fingerprinted and send your fingerprints off to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in order to get that fire, and that cost something like $32 or something like that, so it was kind of an expensive proposition. But anyone who did not have a criminal record, who jumped through the hoops, could have a firearms ID. There was no discretion. It was a must issue, not may issue rule. With respect to concealed carry, that was different. Whether or not you could have a concealed firearms ID was at the sole discretion of the chief of police. You had to fill out, go through the regular routine to get a firearms ID and then fill out some more papers and provide a justification to the chief. And if the chief thought your justification was meritorious, you'd be issued a concealed firearms ID. If not, no. So I think it was Tony Atta that changed that law a legislature or two ago, and now Guam is a must-issue jurisdiction for concealed firearms ID, but it's more complicated than filling out the papers and paying the fee. You also have to complete a firearms training course and present documentary evidence that you have completed that course. Then you can be issued a concealed carry firearms ID. So with respect to the Second Amendment, we only discovered the Second Amendment, I think it was 3 years ago with District of Columbia versus Heller. Up until that time, the Supreme Court had never definitively ruled on the Second Amendment's application to an individual citizen. The closest that we came to it was a case decided in the late 30s dealing with machine guns. But conventional wisdom was, up until Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia came along, that you did not have an individual constitutional right to keep a firearm at your house. And the militia interpretation was much more popular than the Scalia interpretation. But that all changed with Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia. If you were to read Heller and McDonald, you'd find that Mr. Justice Scalia leaves the door open for reasonable regulations. Now, here's a little bit of constitutional law that's kind of hard to get your arms around. When it comes to equal protection of the laws, the word scrutiny is really important. Some statutes must pass strict scrutiny in order to be declared constitutional. Some statutes must only evince a rational state purpose. And the strict scrutiny applies primarily to things like race and sex. Any classification of people based on race is probably going to be subject to strict scrutiny. It means it's really hard to come up with a statute that classifies people based on race that would pass constitutional muster. Fundamental rights. If you're talking about a fundamental right, then strict scrutiny applies. Well, the Second Amendment, personal right to keep a firearm in your house for personal protection, is not a fundamental right, at least as I read McDonald and Heller. Therefore, any rational state purpose that could be brought to bear would get a state statute passed an equal protection challenge. And the way that works, the one who would defend the statute doesn't even need to prove that the statute was enacted to achieve a rational state purpose. The rational state purpose need only be something that can be discovered hypothetically. So on that basis, and Scalia said this in his decisions, you could ban crazy people from having guns, and you could have, reasonable rules and restrictions, and I would think that a firearms ID would easily fall within that rubric. And, of course, if the fee charged for the firearms ID is not confiscatory, that's probably going to pass constitutional muster also. So that's where we are with firearms ID. Now, if you read our firearms laws, it's an extremely restrictive statute, and a lot of it is probably unconstitutional. For instance, if you have a firearm in your house, you got to have it in a locked cabinet, or you have to have a trigger lock on it, and if you don't, you could incur some really serious liability. That's probably contrary to Heller and McDonald, but that's our statute. No one seems to be too upset about that, by the way. So if you want to have my 2 cents worth on it, I don't agree with Scalia's interpretation. I favor Scalia's result. I think that there's probably room to regulate firearms at about the same way we regulate automobiles, that we don't want people out on the road driving around who don't know how to drive. And I don't want people packing heat out in the community who don't know the safety from the trigger. So I would not be opposed to some reasonable regulations that treat firearms in the same manner that we treat automobiles. That might be too extreme for some of our international radio listening audience, but that's how I would come down on it. Going back to Facebook here, Brad Hewitt, with respect to getting the message to the parents, and my theory that the people that you want to reach with that editorial never read the newspaper anyhow, Brad says, put the news in the tattoo shop. And a lot of parents would see it if you put it in the tattoo shop, or maybe at the mom and pop store at the counter, so the parents can check it out when they're buying their cases of beer. It's good sarcasm. Usually the sarcasm is my job, Brad, but I can always use a little help. And let's see. And Ishmael Velez is glad to see that my cough is gone. Not anywhere near as glad as I am, Ishmael, but thanks for your kind thoughts, kind words. And Lee Stolly, I don't think I've seen you on Facebook here since last year, Lee, so Happy New Year. And Daryl Taggarty, yes, school is in session now. Looking forward to your analysis of the newest appointees tomorrow. Yeah, well, you shall have it, Daryl. Albert Eliason, qualified as a Marine expert with an M14 and a 1911 45. Would think that I had passed a firearms course. I don't know about this M14 stuff, Albert Eliason. Back in the old Corps, we qualified with the M1 rifle, perhaps the greatest rifle ever constructed, at least as far as I'm concerned. And Nate Horn, late to the party, but half a day, Bob. Well, better late than never. Nate, glad to see you on board here. So moving right along, back to the card, I was talking about the Leon Guerrero administration and deputy directors. So this legislature, the 34th Guam legislature, in a fit of austerity said, no more salary increments, no more salary increases, no more deputy directors. We've got to really economize. Lou Leon Guerrero, before the Attorney General even opined on the subject, started designating deputy directors. And she has named several people who will be deputy directors. Now, we have two co-equal branches there. We have a legislature and we have a governor. And guess what party held the majority, still holds the majority in the 34th Guam legislature? I'll give you a clue. It starts with a D. So the Democrats passed a law that says, we don't need no stinking deputy directors. And the new Democrat governor, Lou Leon Guerrero, comes along, and the ink is hardly dry on her certificate of election, and she starts naming deputy directors. What will the reaction of the Democrat legislature that will be sworn in on the 4th of January, what will their reaction be? Will they say, hey, we don't want deputy directors. We thought we made that clear. We're going to go back to the drawing board, and we're going to come up with a a attorney general proof statute that does away with deputy directors. And how dare you, Democrat Governor Leon Guerrero, start appointing deputy directors when you know that we don't want them? Is this how we get off to a good start? You know, bipartisanship is nice, but unipartisanship would be really nice too. If you know we don't like them, then why did you do it? Without at least coming over to the legislature with some sort of remedial legislation, an olive branch, or if we had somebody like Elizabeth Warren in our legislature, perhaps a peace pipe. But no, it just, you know, if I were a Democrat senator, I would look at this and say, isn't this just a raw power play on the part of the new governor who we're supposed to be so closely aligned with? Because, you know, did you know, Real Joe Cruz, that for the first time in the history of Guam, the majority of members of the legislature are females? Did you know that?
Yes, sir. I'm well aware.
Wow. Isn't that something? Yeah, I just marvel at that every day. And did you know that Lulian Guerrero is the first female governor of Guam?
Yes, sir.
And did you know that we have a Democrat governor and a Democrat legislature?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're pretty checked out on all this stuff. You must listen to Tall Tales every day.
I happen to, sir.
Yeah. So I see some potential bone of contention there. If for no other reason that if you are a politician, one of the things that in my humble estimation, one of the things that you must always be ready to do is to resist the pressure. When you see some force trying to push you in a direction that you don't want to go, it's not a good idea just to roll over and let them push you around. Because once it happens, it's not going to be an isolated phenomenon. So from the standpoint of institutional integrity, if I were a Democrat and I were in the 35th Guam legislature, I'd say, hey, hold on, wait a minute. We already spoke on this deputy director thing. We can't let this go. Now, if the incoming Democrat legislature just lets it go, what does that tell you? It tells you that my prognostication about a veto-proof legislature is probably going to be quite accurate. And for those who may have missed my definition of a veto-proof legislature, ordinarily we think in terms of a veto-proof legislature. When we have 15 senators, we think, well, if there are 10 members of the same party and the governor vetoes a bill, those 10 people can override that veto. And that's what we ordinarily mean by a veto-proof legislature. But there is a tall tales definition of a veto-proof legislature. And this is what it is. When Tina Rose Munya Barnes was able to shove Carice Terlahi aside, the heir apparent to the speakership, and when certain other people got other positions within the legislature, I hypothesize that Lulian Guerrero has a pretty tight grip on a lot of those senators. And because of that, the legislature will not pass anything that Lulian Guerrero doesn't like. And if the legislature never passes something that Lou doesn't like, then she'll never have to veto anything. Thus, the new definition of the veto-proof legislature, another way of saying the very tame legislature. Well, if the legislature just lets this deputy director thing go without a peep, then I think my prophecy is becoming more and more credible. Next item. I have something here on this is budget cuts ordered after veto. So I need to read this to lay the foundation for the next item on my Lulian Guerrero versus the legislature. 7 government agencies that receive funding from the Territorial Education Facilities Fund have been asked to cut spending following Governor Eddie Calvo's decision to veto Bill 374 last Friday. This is from today's Post. The bill would have corrected language in the current year's budget law to allow the tax on property improvements to take effect. You'll remember this was the, quote, or more bill that only received my grudging support because I was still making an issue of the governor's surprise holidays, if you recall that. Going back to the story, the property tax provision originally was projected to raise about $8 million, all of which was deposited in the TEFF account. The veto was expected to leave the TEFF short that same amount. However, the memo issued to affected agencies Wednesday reveals that the estimated shortfall as a result of the veto will now be just over $9 million. The memo was issued by Lester Carlson, the acting director of the Bureau of Budget and Management Research, and the designated new director of the Bureau of Budget Management Research in the Leon Guerrero administration. The memo was sent to the superintendent of education, the director of public works, the president of Chamorro Affairs, the president of the university, the executive director of the Guam Commission for Education, the president of Guam Community College, the executive director of the Mayor's Council of Guam, Snow White, and 4 of the dwarfs. The Guam Department of Education is facing the largest, quote, required spending reduction. Superintendent John Fernandez must reduce spending by $4.7 million. The Department of Public Works is facing a $2.5 million cut in its school bus operating budget. The other agencies are facing lesser reductions ranging from $423,000 to $87,000. Stopping here for a minute, you know the old saying about a person cutting off his nose to spite his face? Yeah. I wonder if Eddie Calvo has been to a rhinologist lately, you know, because he asked for tax increases. He begged for tax increases. He pled for tax increases to keep the government afloat. So when the legislature gave him this tax increase, he vetoed it. And the veto appeared to have been motivated by, if nothing else, spite. Because the veto, the corrective bill, the bill as passed, put in place a higher tax rate on real property upon which buildings worth $1 million were located. The Attorney General said $1 million means $1 million if the value is $1 million and $1,001, tax doesn't apply. So I'm going to come back after the 7th inning stretch and explicate on this matter a little bit more.
It's important to have claims process that works for you. At Guahan Insurance Services, we make things simple and convenient. Same door you walk in to purchase your insurance is the same door you open to file your claim. We can't pretend that the car insurance claims process is fun, but we can promise a hassle-free and speedy recovery without any runarounds. For your home, auto, and business insurance, visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center on Marine Corps Drive in Tamuning. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or give us a call at 475-1162 or text 929-SAVE. That's 929-7283.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training every morning on The Ray Gibson Show.
You have a vacation coming up. You want more freedom and fun, and you don't want to have to drag a bunch of work along with you. I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, I'll have a few ideas on how to make that happen.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services on The Ray Gibson Show on 93.3 The Point.
Loss ends our 7th inning stretch. There's 2 more innings of tall tales to go today. And I've been talking here about the incoming Leon Guerrero administration and their potential relationship with the incoming 35th Guam legislature. And I detect some instant friction over the position of deputy director. The Democrats in the 35th said no more deputy directors. Leon Guerrero, before the ink was even dry on her certificate of election, started naming deputy directors, even before the Attorney General said that that was permissible. And so what does the Democrat legislature think when its own Democrat governor kind of thumbs her nose at them? And I've got Ishmael Velez has his own gloss on the situation. Ishmael says, we don't need deputy directors unless there are deputy directors. Yeah, that probably makes a little sense, don't you think? Shelley Gibson, and Happy New Year to you. And Nate Horn says, hopefully it's not a group of yes men or women. Yeah. Well, I think a person can be a yes person regardless of their sex, right, Real Joe Cruz? I almost said his or her sex. Yeah, I almost screwed that up. I got to use the word there. Excuse me. So now, going back to Bill 374, that was the bill that was to correct the budget law that said that levied a higher tax rate on real property upon which was located a building worth $1 million. And 374 would add the words or more. Worth $1 million or more, because the Attorney General said, given the language of the bill, that tax could only be levied on a building that was worth exactly $1 million. So this was curative legislation. You'll recall that Tom Atta and Fernando Esteves had something of a shootout during the committee of the whole about this bill, but the bill finally passed and went to Governor Calvo. He vetoed it. And I think the veto was partially motivated by spite, because only 7 senators voted to pass the bill. And you recall that we now understand that given the language of the Organic Act, given the right number of people in the hall, 7 senators can pass a bill. We went on the misapprehension that it took 8 members for a long, long time. So the governor, just really stuck it to the legislature, saying, well, if 7 people weren't enough to pass my Tran bill, then it's not enough to pass this one either. And what happened there was that the governor's Tran bill, his interim financing to pay tax refunds, passed the legislature with 7 votes. And the governor was able to get a declaratory judgment from the Supreme Court saying, yeah, that's all you need. But without going into a lot of detail, this declaratory judgment thing is a complete waste of time. And if you ever needed a demonstration, that was it. Because the Supreme Court said, we'll answer that legal question for you, but we're not going to enter any orders, and we're not going to do any fact-finding here. So the Supreme Court said, yeah, 7 is enough to pass it. 7 had voted for it. But the mechanics of the governor and legislative relationship on bills is that until the legislature enrolls a bill and it's signed by the speaker and sent to the governor, is kind of none of the governor's business. The governor can have no effect on a bill while it's still in the legislature. There's separation of powers dimension there. There's something called the enrolled bill. Once a bill is signed and enrolled, a court is not going to look behind that bill to see if the legislature did or did not comply with its own internal procedures. So the Supreme Court said, yeah, 7 votes, that's enough. The bill, there was enough there to pass the bill. The legislature said, we're not going to sign it and send it off to you. And they held on to it for quite some time, and then they moved to reconsider it, because as long as the bill is still within the 4 walls of the legislature can pretty much do with it what it wants, or do nothing at all if it so desires. So the legislature reconsidered the bill and voted it down. The governor was quite angry. He had some very unkind words for the legislative secretary at the time, for the legislature in general, as a matter of fact. But the governor didn't get his TRAN, his interim financing. So when he vetoed Bill 374, he said, well, you know, if 7 votes weren't enough to pass my TRAN bill, and it's not enough to pass your Bill 374 either, and used his veto pen to kind of sketch a little figure of a person thumbing his nose at the legislature on the bill, and sent it back. And, of course, the legislature now doesn't have enough time to do an override, but because the governor vetoed that bill, he has shorted his own administration as per this release that I just read. It is a severe handicap for the last couple days of his administration, and it's going to be a real tough nut to crack for the incoming Leon Guerrero administration. Now, the end of the article quotes Tom Atta. Tom Atta introduced the bill, later vetoed by the governor after the Attorney General issued an opinion concluding that without the words, quote, or more, close quote, added to the law, the tax would apply only to property improvements valued at exactly $1 million, no more, no less. When asked for his reaction to the governor's veto Wednesday, Atta told the Post, quite frankly, I don't understand his rationale. Well, I hadn't explained his rationale at that time, Tom. Now you understand it. Atta, who did not seek re-election, said it is his understanding that Senator Joe San Augustine, who will chair the Appropriations Committee in the next legislature, is ready to take on this particular bill and reintroduce it again. So here's the tension now. Lou Leon Guerrero campaigned on a George Bush, read my lips, no new taxes. Lou Leon Guerrero campaigned on, I'm going to collect the taxes that are on the books. I'm not going to raise taxes. So if San Augustine does what Atta thinks he'll do, reintroduces the bill and it's passed and it's sent to new Governor Lou Leon Guerrero, what will she do? Will she try to figure out how to operate on a shortage of $8 million and stay true to her campaign promise? Or will she say, well, you know, that was then, but this is now, and I need that $8 million. Otherwise, my budget is unbalanced by $8 million, so I'm going to sign this bill. If she signs it, well, that kind of, the H word kind of comes into play here, a little bit of hypocrisy. But if she doesn't sign it, then we're back to how could a Democrat governor veto a Democrat legislature's bill that was meant to help the Democrat governor? Just like, how could a Democrat governor go about naming all of these deputy directors when a Democrat legislature told her, we don't want deputy directors? So they're all Democrats. Most of them are all even females. But I predict that there's going to be plenty to talk about at the beginning of the Leon Guerrero administration, and that the relationship between the legislature, the Democrat legislature, and the Democrat governor may not be as sweet as one would think, since they're all part of the same party. So that was, let's see, what was the name of that item on the card? That was Lou Leon Guerrero versus the legislature concerning deputy directors and the, quote, or more bill. I want to spend just a minute more on Tom Atta and the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. I've made the point over and over again that Tom has done, I wouldn't say he's done a poor job on this whole Chamorro Land Trust Commission scandal. He just hasn't done anything at all, which in a sense perhaps is even worse. But his parting shot, instead of introducing instead of giving remedial legislation a hearing back in May, which would have solved this whole problem, he introduced a bill that would sweep the whole mess under the rug, and in a great hurry had the bill on for hearing a week after he received the materials he needed from the Land Trust Commission, but then after that did nothing. And now he's attempting to extend his reach from a legislature in which he is a member into a legislature which he is a stranger. He's not a member. And that is that he had his briefing the other day at which he came up with a report for the record after having purported to have done an investigation, and he must have borrowed the same playbook that the Chamorro Land Trust Commission used, because he didn't find anything wrong either. So now he has attempted to influence the oncoming legislature, and this is covered in the Post for the 29th of December, and the Daily News for the 28th of December. And the reason I'm coming back to this is I want to make a correction. Yeah, and this is John O'Connor's story in the December 31st Post. And I'm kind of disappointed in John because he's followed this story from the very beginning, and he seemed to be on top of it all along. And you'll recall that when Tom Atta had his briefing, I went because I wanted to watch. And big surprise, after the briefing, Tom entertained testimony. I couldn't resist, and I testified, and I said the same things that you've heard me say so many times, and was critical of his attempt to influence a legislature in which he would not even be a part. And once again beat the drum for Bill, I think it was 384. 284, yeah, that was Bill 284. I once again said, you know, had you moved on this, Senator Atta, we wouldn't be dealing with this now. And I gave a short description of it, and Tom Atta said, well, I don't like the word receiver. I don't like that because it means we can't do our jobs. And I said, well, then perhaps instead of temporary receiver, temporary administrator would have worked just as well. And I said it's obvious that the Chamorro Land Trust Commission can't do its job, because if it could, we wouldn't be sitting here today. But Tom didn't like the word receiver. Now, here's John O'Connor's story, and I'm a little disappointed in this. His December 31 story. Widespread land trust lease problems exposed. Commissioners learned several leases were without commission approval, and the switching practice was not part of law but an administrative practice. The CLTC initiated a major review of all leases and possible revisions to its governing law. Throughout this process, the CLTC faced public scrutiny and questions by lawmakers. Senator Uggan had forwarded a few legislative revisions meant to hold the CLTC more accountable. Among them was a bill that would impose temporary federal receivership of the commission. No, and I wanted to bring this back because anybody who read that story in the Post on December 31, no federal receivership. I don't know how the word federal snuck in there because it was not part of Senator Uggan's law, It was never part of the debate. It was never mentioned here on Tall Tales. And for what it's worth, having a federal receiver at the Chamorro Land Trust Commission would be a bad idea. I share Senator Ada's general distrust of the whole receiver mechanism, like we had with the Department of Corrections and the ORDOT dump, because it tends to cost us an awful lot of money to do what we just should be doing ourselves, and it shouldn't be used as a crutch. But I did want to correct that one story here, that Senator Uggan's bill would not create a federal receivership, created a temporary local receivership. And the way it would work would be this, that the governor of Guam would appoint a retired judge from either Guam or the CNMI, pay that judge the same salary that he received before he retired. The judge would have all of the powers of the director of the Land Trust Commission and the director of land management to discipline people, to straighten the whole mess out, and to promulgate rules and regulations that never got promulgated, and to generally restore the credibility of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. Tom Ada never did that. He finally set the bill down for hearing on July 13th and then canceled the hearing and never rescheduled it. And now what he wants to do is forward his findings to the next legislature, hoping that they'll sweep the whole matter under the rug. Well, this is going to be a real test for the 35th Guam legislature. Are they going to want to dig in and do the right thing here, or are they going to want to do the political easy thing and say, well, you know, we've got these findings and innocent people will be heard and they're nice people up there and the Chamorro Land Trust Commission didn't do anything wrong? Which one will they do? Will they go for accountability, or will they go for an easy way out of the whole mess? Anybody want to place any bets? So that's that item on the calendar, on the card. I see that we're coming up to the home stretch. The next item on the home stretch is Bill Bratton versus marijuana. So we'll be back in just a second.
Chili's 3 for Me menu just got bigger. We're giving you more choices for the same great price. For just $15, you can get a beverage, salad, and an entree. First, choose from a refreshing Coca-Cola, iced tea, or Heineken on draft. Then enjoy a house salad and select your choice of a mouth-watering entree, like our half-rack ribs, Cajun chicken pasta, old-timer burger, personal chicken fajitas, or the flavorful margarita flatbread. So hurry in today and enjoy our Chili's 3 for Me menu for just $15. Available for a limited time. Chili's, more life happens here.
Cheers to 80 years. It's our 80th anniversary and the gifts are on us. 80 gift certificates, 8 shopping sprees, 8 staycations, and 1 round-trip flyaway for 2 to Manila. So how do you enter? Calvo's Insurance personal home and auto customers are automatically entered. Non-Calvo's customers may enter by receiving a qualified quote. It's our way of saying thank you for trusting us for the past 80 years. For more details, visit calvos.com/giveaway or call 472-6816. Calvo's Insurance, serving Guam for 80 years.
So here we are heading down the home stretch on Tall Tales. I got about 10 more minutes and we'll hear the plaintive strains of Ravel's Bolero, one of my favorite songs. And I've got an article here that ran in Newsmax, and it's about a gentleman named Bill Bratton. And it's what you would have to characterize as an anti-marijuana article. I've expressed my thoughts on marijuana on more than one occasion. I think we are making a lot of mistakes here with the way we're handling marijuana. And I'm going to read this as an example. Lamenting, he is a, quote, voice crying in the wilderness as society moves to a marijuana culture. The former police commissioner of New York, Los Angeles, and Boston, Bill Bratton, called it a quote, mistake to rush headlong into legalization. I strongly oppose it, he said on 970 AM New York. I think there are too many unanswered questions. We still don't have effective capabilities and law enforcement to deal with the issue of driving while impaired by the use of marijuana. It is as addictive as any other drug. We don't really know the full effect of that drug on the development of children. Young people will be getting their hands on it. While he did acknowledge there might be some tax benefits to fund social programs, Bratton told his host, John Katsimatis, that there will be far more abuse. You can tax marijuana all you want. It's still going to be illegally grown, illegally sold, Bratton said. It's my belief we're opening up Pandora's box. Oh, well, I think I'm a voice crying in the wilderness, unfortunately. Bratton also acknowledged some medicinal benefits of the drug, but that too came with abuse in our society, including homeless and societal vagabonds begging for handouts outside of pot shops. And then there's a quote from Bratton, amazing the number of very ill people that California had once it became available for medicinal use. Bratton said, I'm sorry, but I think it's a mistake to rush headlong into it, and that's exactly what we're doing. And we're trying really hard to rush headlong into it here on Guam, and fortunately we haven't been very successful because as desirous as pro-marijuana folks are, there is a degree of ineptitude involved that hasn't been conquered as of yet. Once again, this is the tall tale's position on marijuana. It's a Schedule I narcotic, which means it's against the law to have it, possess it, sell it, grow it, etc. And to me, that's pretty important. If it's against the law, it's against the law. Whether I like the law or not is important, but not dispositive. So as long as it's against the law, we shouldn't be doing it. Especially our governor, who took an oath to support the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and signed on to an organic act that requires him to execute the laws of the United States. It's kind of hypocritical for him to come out in favor of legalizing that which is illegal. So that's the first problem. Second problem is that it's a Schedule I narcotic, and by definition that means it has been determined that it has no medicinal benefit or use, etc. Well, this I don't like, and this kind of takes me back to my federalism argument. I don't think the U.S. government, our national government, should have any business telling us what plants we can grow in any one of the states, and by derivation, in the territories. National government could regulate interstate commerce in marijuana, but it should not become the city council or the state legislature with respect to what can and can't be done. But it did, and with the Schedule I denomination, we'll never know if marijuana does have positive medicinal effects. And when I went online and cruised around a little bit, I did discover, in response to one of our callers' posts who said that the national government had patented marijuana, and a patent number was put on Facebook here. I went and looked that up, and what I determined was that various agencies in the United States government put patents on all kinds of substances as a cautionary measure. They do it in case their research leads somewhere, then they'll have some protection of the work that they put in on the research. And they had patented some of the compounds that are found in the cannabis plant, not marijuana itself, some of the compounds and some of the derivations for those compounds. And they determined that those compounds do have a salutary effect on certain kinds of brain diseases or problems. Now, those compounds are not feel-good compounds. They're curative, not palliative. So maybe there's more of that if people could, if the research arena were opened up a little bit more broadly. So I would, if I were the Ayatollah here, instead of just a feeble talk show host, I would take marijuana off the Schedule I list, and I would encourage research to see if it does in fact have medicinal properties. And if it does, then we should treat it like we treat any other pharmaceutical problem, pharmaceutical compound. We have a Food and Drug Administration. We do a pretty good job of dealing with curative and palliative drugs in our country, and we should treat marijuana just like that. As far as I'm concerned, that's enough. Given the drug culture that we live in right now, given the problems that we've had with right here in our island with ice and heroin and occasionally large shipments of cocaine, not to mention alcohol, I don't see that we're doing ourselves any favors by legalizing another mind-altering drug. And you call me a blue nose, call me a Puritan or whatever, but looking at it from a societal benefit, I don't see that society benefits by introducing more mind-altering chemicals into its midst. So I'm going to keep an eye on the entire rush to legalize marijuana as it goes along. And when I find articles like this, or like the one that pointed out the really hard tax ramifications of marijuana cultivation, I will share them with our international radio listening audience. And tomorrow, of course, I'm going to get back in. I didn't get to Zemi Ikotny versus the other Meet the Press, nor Maisie Hirono versus the Knights of Columbus, but I'm sure I'll get to those tomorrow. So see you guys tomorrow. So long.